Today we're going to work on rounding whole numbers. I have told you many times how important rounding is to third grade. That's why we spent our first 2 days learning how to do it. The first day we worked on rounding to the nearest 10 and the nearest 100. Then the second day we took it up a level and we rounded to the nearest 1,000 and 10,000. Today we're going to put it all together. Let me remind you of our poem. Okay, so 5 or more, add 1 more, 4 or less, let it rest. Okay, so we're going to round 73 to the nearest 10. I'm going to underline the 7 because it's in the tens place. Now, this is my number that's going to tell me what to do. 3. Okay, is 3 5 or more? Nope. Is 3 4 or less? Yes. Let it rest. So we're going to let the 7 rest and stay at 7. Everything else changes to a 0. Everything behind it. So 73 rounded to the nearest 10 would be 70. And you can think about that. 73 on a number line would be between 70 and 80. And I bet you can imagine in your mind that 73 would be pretty close to 70 on that number line. Okay, now we're going to round to the nearest 100. I'm going to underline my hundreds place. Now I have to look at the neighbor next door. Now it's an 8. Okay, so I'm either going to let this 7 rest at 7 and change everything else to zeros, or I'm going to add 1 more to that number and change everything else to zeros. Okay, so we've got an 8. 5 or more, add 1 more. Is 8 bigger than 5? It sure is. So we're going to add 1 to that 7, right? And then everything else, that'll be 8, and then everything else goes to 0. So it would round to 800. See what we're doing? It's not so bad. Now we're going to round 4,273 to the nearest 1,000. I'm going to underline my thousands place. We will either let it rest and change everything else to zeros, or we will add 1 more and change everything else to zeros. Okay, so now I'm going to look at 2. What does 2 tell me to do? 4 or less. Let it rest. So I'm going to keep that a 4, and everything that comes after it is going to turn to 0. So we would round 4,273 to 4,000. It's just the same with this one, except now we're going to do 10,000. So I'm going to underline my 10,000s place. Now we're either going to let this rest and stay 2, and everything that comes after it will turn to zeros, or we're going to add 1 more, and then everything that comes after it will turn to zeros. So let's look at our number next door. We've got a 3. Okay, is 3 more than 5? No, so we're not going to add 1 more. Is 3 less than 4? Yes, we're going to let it rest. So this is going to become a 2, and that's a 0, 0, 0, 0, and so that rounds to 20,000. See, I kept the 2. Everything else turned to a 0. Now I'm going to show you what it's going to be like on your actual paper. I have color-coded it for you. So we're going to round to the 10,000s first. That's in blue. Then thousands, then hundreds, then tens. And in your teacher-made worksheet, it's the same. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is round it to the nearest 10,000. So I need to underline the 10,000s place. Okay, I have a 1. So that 1 is either going to let it rest, or I'm going to need to add 1 more. Let's look at my neighbor. I've got a 9. Okay. 5 or more, add 1 more. Okay, I have 1. What is it if I add 1 to 1? It's 2. Okay, then everything after it becomes a 0. So 19,055 rounds to 20,000 to the nearest 10,000. All right, here we go. Now we're going to go to the thousands place. I'm going to underline the thousands. Okay, now we're either going to let it rest and keep that a 9 and change everything that comes after it. Now this one's not going to change, right? Because it comes before, but everything that comes after, we're going to change it to a 0. So we're either going to add one more or let it rest. Okay, let's look at what's right next to the 9. 0. Oh, look at that. 4 or less, let it rest. So we're going to keep this at 19,000. Okay, right? I can't bump it up to the next 1,000. I don't have enough in the hundreds place. Now let's look at the hundreds place. I'm going to underline it. I have 0. So it's either going to let it rest at 0 or I'm going to add one more. Let's look next door. Oh, it's a 5. 5 or more, add one more. Okay, so I'm going to keep my 19,000. That's not going to change because I'm rounding to the nearest 100. But my hundreds might change. Now, I have 0 hundreds, but I need to add 1 to it. So how many will I have? 100. Everything else changes to zeros. So rounded to the nearest 100, it would be 19,100. I know, it's a lot of steps. A lot of steps. Okay, now I'm going to round it to the nearest 10, which means everything that comes before it is going to stay the same. So my 10,000, my 9,000, and my 0 hundreds will all stay the same. I can go ahead and write those down. 10,000, 9,000s, 0 hundreds. But that 5 tens, I'm going to either let it rest or add one more. Well, look at what we do. 5 or more, add one more. What do I get if I add 1 to that number? 6. So it rounds to 19,060 to the nearest 10. I know, it's a lot, right? It is a lot. Let's do another one. Again, we're going to go from 10,000 to 1,000 to 100 to 10. Okay, my 10,000, this number is 48,395. My 10,000's number is 4. So that's either going to let it rest or add one more. Look at the neighbor. 8. Okay, 5 or more, add one more. So if I add 1 to that number, what would it be? Right, it would be 5. And then everything else turns to zeros. What this is really saying is 48,000 is between 40,000 and 50,000. And on the number line, it would be closer to 50,000. It's only 2,000 something away from that number. Well, not quite 2,000. Okay, now we're going to round it to the thousands. I'm going to underline the thousands place. Okay, so that 8 will either add one more. I can go ahead and write down my 10,000s. That's not going to change. Okay, so I'm going to put 4 there. That 4 right there is not going to change. It comes before it. It's only the numbers after it that change. Okay, so 8. I look next door, I have a 3. 3 tells me I can let it rest. So I'm going to put 8 and change everything else to zeros. So it rounds to 48,000. Now let's do hundreds. I'm going to underline the hundreds place. Okay, my 4 and my 8, my 4 10,000s and my 8,000s will not change. Write them down because they come before. The 3 might change. I look at my 9. What does the 9 tell me to do? Add one more. So I'm going to change that to a 4. Everything else becomes a 0. I think it's kind of fun, but it's a lot. Okay, and now I'm going to round to the nearest 10. I have 9 10s. So I'm either, we're going to have to use the magic of 10 here. Okay, Okay, so let's look. Remember, if we have to add one more to this number, we're going to send that 10 over to there. Okay, so this time my hundreds might change. I'm just going to write down the 48. Whenever you have a 9, you got to be aware. You've got to watch because the magic of 10 might tell you have to send a number over. Oh, I can't write down the 3 yet because it might. Okay, so let's look. Here's what I mean. I have 9 tens. I have a 5 next door. What does 5 tell me to do? Add one more. But I can't put a 10 right there, right? I've got to put a 4 here and then change everything else to zeros. So even though we rounded to the nearest 10, we ended up with the same answer as rounding to the nearest 100. That can happen sometimes. Let's look at a few more. I know this is a lot. Really, it's just about checking to make sure you know your place value. Okay, I'm trying not to make this video too long, so I'm only going to do 2, maybe 3 with you. Now, this is color-coded just like your worksheets. The blue all the way across, we're going to round to the 10,000s. The red all the way across, we're going to round to the thousands. The green, hundreds, and the purple is the tens. So let's start out with our blue, which is 10,000s. That's why I'm underlining the 10,000s place in blue. All right, so I'm going to look next door. I have a 3. So does 3 tell me to let that rest at 2 or to add 1 to it? Right, it tells me to let it rest. So I'm going to put down my 2 10,000s. Everything after it's going to turn to a 0. Okay, so 23,547 would round to 20,000. Okay, now I'm going to round to the thousands. Let me underline the thousands place. I can go ahead and put my 2 down because 2 is not going to change. Now, if I have a 9 there, sometimes I can't write it down yet, but I don't have a 9, so I can write that down. So this is either going to let it rest or add 1 more. Look at the 5. What does 5 tell me to do? 5 or more, add 1 more. What is it if I add 1 to 3? Right, 4. And then everything else becomes a 0. So rounded to the nearest 1,000, it would round to 24,000. Okay, now let's look at the nearest 100. I'm going to underline the hundreds in green. Okay, I don't have a 9 anywhere in this number, so I can go ahead and write down my 2 and my 3. They're not going to change. I'm still going to have 23,000. My hundreds might change, though. Look at my number next door. 4 or less, let it rest. So I get to keep that as a 5. That turns to 0. That turns to 0. So rounded to the nearest 100, it would be 23,500. Now I'm going to round to the nearest 10. I don't have any 9s, so I can write down my 2 10,000s, 3,000s, 500s, and I can't do my 10s yet. So 23,500, and then we don't know what's going to happen to the 10s place. Or do we? We have a 7 next door. What's 7 tell me to do to that 4? Add 1 to it, which is 5. Change everything else to a 0. So 23,550. Okay, so let me show you another strategy. It might help us to go straight across. Can you go straight across? Sure. Let's just round to all the 10,000. Oh, that one's got a 9 10,000s. That one's got a 1 10,000. That's got an 8. Now 9, I'm already, oh boy, I'm watching closely. So My 10,000s, I have 4 of them. I have a 9 next door, right? 5 or more, add 1 more. What's 4 plus 1? 5. I change everything else to a 0. So rounding that to the nearest 10,000, it's 50,000. Okay, let's look next door. Now I'm going to do this one to the 10,000s. Okay, I have 1 here. I look next door. I have a 2. What does 2 tell me to do? Let it rest. So I'm going to write down a 1. That becomes a 0. That's a 0. That's a 0. That's a 0. Okay, so I just look at that place value. Everything else becomes a 0. Everything after it becomes a 0. Here I have 8 10,000s. I look next door, and I have 6,000s. 6,000s, 6 is 5 or more, add 1 more. So I'm going to turn that 8 into a 9. Everything after the 8 or the 9 now becomes a 0. Okay, is that easier if you go straight across and round all to the 10,000s and then all to the thousands? Maybe. Let's look at the next one. Okay, here I have 9,000s. So I can't write down my 4 because if I have to go up, I might have to send a 10 over. So let's look. 9,000s, I have 6 in my next place, and that does tell me to add 1, right? Now, if I add 1 here, can I have 10 right here? No, I got to add it here. So now, look at that. I'm already back up. I got to change this to a 5. Everything else becomes a 0. Holy moly guacamole. Those 9s change everything. Let's look at the next one. So 12,529 has 2,000s. Okay, I can go ahead and write down my 1 10,000. This one's either going to let it rest at 2 or change to a 3. Let's look at next door. 5 or more, add 1 more. What is it if I add 1 to 2? 3. Okay, and then everything after it becomes a 0. 0, 0, 0. Let's look at the next one. Here I have 6,000s. I can go ahead and write down my 8 10,000s. That won't change because it comes before. Now, oh, look, I have 0. So my thousands won't change either. I can keep that as 6 and change everything else to a 0. Is that easier doing it that way? Maybe, so that you're rounding to the same place value each time. Now we're going to do hundreds. Here I have 600s. Okay, so I can write down my 4 and my 9. Okay, because these aren't changing now. 49, but my hundreds might. And they will. Look, I have an 8 next door. 5 or more, add 1 more. So I'm going to change that to a 7. Everything else becomes a 0. Let's look at the next one. 5. Okay, so I can write down my 12,000 because that comes before. That won't change. But now let's look here. I have 5, and next door I have a 2. Can I change if I have a 2? Nope, I'm going to let it rest. Change everything else to a 0. 12,500. Now let's look here. I have 0. So I can write down my 86,000s. That won't change because that comes before. Now, I'm either going to let that rest at 0 or I'm going to add 1 more. What does 4 tell me to do? 4 or less, let it rest. So I'm going to keep that as 0 and change everything else to 0s. All right, last row, and then you're on your own, kiddos. Okay, so now I'm going to round to the nearest 10. I have 8 10s here. I can write down my 49,000, my 600s, and that's all. That's all I can do. 49,600s, because my 10s might change. But let's look. They have a 2 next door. Is my 10 going to change? No, it's not. It's going to stay an 8. And then the 2 becomes a 0. Let's look here. Uh-oh, we have a 9. So we might have a change. I can write down my 12,000, my 10,000, my 2,000s, and my 500s. Those won't change. But my 10s might change. And it will, right? 5 or more, add 1 more. So if I add 1 to that, that becomes a 3. Almost done. You're almost on your own. Okay, now I can write my 8 10,000s, my 6,000s, and my 0 hundreds down. Those will not change. But my 10s might, and it will. Look at what's next door. 5 or more, add 1 more. So I'm going to change the 4 to a 5 and add a 0. Okay, it's a lot. I know. I get it. I get it. May the force be with you. Remember, on your worksheet, you have to go 10,000s in the top row. It's all blue. Thousands in the next row, they're all red. You don't have to make them red. Okay, that's just, they're underlined in red so that you can remember each time you're rounding to the thousands. This row is underlined in green straight across because you're underlining to the hundreds. And then the last row is underlined in purple to remind you to round to the tens place each time. All right, may the force be with you.